G'day crew, welcome to Go Fantasy. Nice to have your company. It's the Ruck Dilemma edition. Go Fantasy brought to you by checkmyrates.au. Visit the website. It's free to use. Take control of your financial future. We're back again and a rare bit of time on a Thursday afternoon to do some work. So it's just been getting me thinking today after it's been confirmed. Well, it's been confirmed essentially that Reilly O'Brien is returning. We'll see once the teams drop in a couple of hours that Adelaide will go with their dual ruck setup against Fremantle to take on Darcy and Jackson with Rob and Lockie McAndrew. So there's a lot of short and long term, potential medium term ramifications for the way that this all plays out. For those who have McAndrew at R3, not as many concerns, just a hope that his cash gen continues. For those who have him on field as a starter, this week it's not a disaster because of best 18, but moving forward it's starting to get a little bit concerning. So what are we going to do about this McAndrew situation? And it prompts a broader discussion about where we are with the ruck situation across the league. So it appears to me, after what we saw with Oscar Steen coming in last week at Collingwood, that there is a pretty firm preference from a lot of coaches across the league to use the fifth spot on the interchange for a ruckman, because they're struggling, I think, to distribute the interchange cap easily across the 5 people on the bench. So all well and good last year with 4, now with 5, a little bit more difficult, a bit more challenging. They don't want their prime movers to get stuck on the bench too much. I think it's a bit more straightforward to rotate one of your bigs off the bench at all times. So clubs seem to be leaning that way, and I'll give you the rundown. So essentially in alphabetical order, at Adelaide this week we'll see Reilly O'Brien with Big Mac, Lockie McAndrew. At Brisbane we'll see Fort and Draper. At Carlton we'll see Pitnet probably go solo. They tried 1 week of the dual ruck setup and didn't like it with Liam Reedy. Collingwood against Brisbane we'll see Darcy Cameron and Oscar Steen. Essendon we'll see Lockie Blackiston. And Nick Bryan is playing in the VFL, so that's a TBA as to whether Bryan comes in and Blackiston stays in the team. At Fremantle, of course, we've got Jackson and Darcy. At Essendon, we've got Blitzarves and Edwards sharing the role. At GWS, we've got Kieran Briggs as the solo ruck, but it wouldn't be a massive surprise to see Nick Madden come in after the bye. At Gold Coast, we've got Jared Witts as a solo ruck, one of only a few. At Hawthorn, we've got Reeves and Meek. After 1 round, Sam Mitchell pulled the trigger on bringing Reeves in, and he said at his press conference during the week that they think right now their favourite way to use the 5th player on the bench is with the second ruck. Tristan Sherry is a solo at North Melbourne, and this week they'll probably go with Calman Coleman Jones and Jack Darling. At Port Adelaide, at the moment, they've got Jordan Sweets as the solo ruck. They started with Vizentini, and they haven't moved from the 1 ruck setup so far. For the most part, Richmond, of course, would have Toby Nankervis as their solo ruck. Last week, they went with Gray and probably a bit of Bolter, but it didn't work that well. They do have a former basketball on their list that they could potentially bring in to try a proper ruckman as their main guy without Nank. At St Kilda, we've got TDK, of course, alongside Rowan Marshall, which has been a fantasy disaster for Big Row. At Sydney, we see Brodie Grundy go solo. Occasionally, Dean Cox has used Pete Laddams even as a sub, but Brodie has the market share on that. At West Coast, mostly Flynn with a bit of Cooper Duff Titler, and then, of course, English is solo at the Western Bulldogs. So when you take all of that into account, there's actually not that many ruckmen that we want. Jackson has shown that he can score as the solo ruck, and it certainly helps that Darcy doesn't have a huge amount of time on ground and that Jackson also plays at times as a midfielder. We don't want Pitnet as a solo ruck. He's not an option. We don't want Briggs. He's scoring terribly, and most likely Madden comes into the team. Jared Witts, good in draft, but probably not a guy we're looking for in salary cap because he lacks the ceiling of the other solo guys, which, Max Gawn has been the most reliable so far this season. Tristan Sherry got himself into a pickle, had a great game against Flynn, but doesn't look like he's going to be the guy right now. Jordan Sweet, not enough ceiling. too low of a floor. Now, Curvis has always been a serviceable player, but probably in draft. So Grundy, English, Gawn is really all we're looking at in terms of what we want. McAndrew has been great for the first few weeks. And I think the big question for all of us going forward is, are we willing to ride this wave and see how it works out with potentially Reilly O'Brien going out of the team next week? Because is this a short-term measure from the Crows to take on Fremantle, or are they just content with how much work Reilly O'Brien has done in the SANFL to work on his jumping and his ruck craft for these new rules, and now they're going to roll the two big guys? They've tried Finbar Maley, they've tried young Toby Murray. Hasn't quite worked so far. So there's a lot of wait and see about the way we approach our rucks over the next couple of weeks. Now in Supercoach, there's probably a fair portion of players out there who have been running with at least 2 frontline rucks in their teams, and maybe they've got McAndrew as their flex. Going into this week, I had 3 first-line rucks in English, Sherry, and Jackson, as well as McAndrew. But now I've traded out Sherry because of the 3-week ban, and he hasn't been replaced by a ruckman. Potentially, I look to bring in Gawn, knowing that we can't rely on McAndrew on field for much longer. But for those in fantasy that have ZZ Top, Zane Zakastelski as their R3 with McAndrew at R2, now that there needs to be a decision on how are we getting in someone to cover McAndrew if we get to next week when teams are named in a week from now and there's still a dual ruck setup. Are we taking that risk? Do we want to get more scoring on field? So there's a lot to weigh up, and there's not many options in terms of how we're getting up to one of these big guys, because like we've just outlined, English, Grundy, Sweet, Pitnet, Gawn and Briggs and Witts are the only solo rucks, and there's only a small portion of those who we actually want on our team. So it's going to be a long way to get up from McAndrew to a Grundy or a Gawn or a Witts or someone who can at least get you through. So a lot of thought's going to have to go into that, potentially some money having to be stashed away. At the moment, I've got $360, I think, in the bank if I stay with my trades this week. So that would allow me to potentially upgrade. And instead of it being, moving a mid-pricer in defence or in the forward line up to a primo, it's going to have to be getting the ruck up. So just a thought bubble for you on our rucks and the work that we're going to have to do in the next couple of weeks. I hope that that's not the case, but we have to prepare for all scenarios. So Reilly O'Brien returning for the Crows. He'll take on Fremantle alongside Lockie McAndrew, as far as we know. Teams to be confirmed in the next hour or so. So stay tuned on Goat Fantasy. We'll have a chat with Warnie to preview the entire round coming up tomorrow. Until then, take care.